What's up, everybody? Welcome back to 90s Obscurity. Today I have Glen Phillips. He's the frontman for Toad the Wet Sprocket. He just released a solo album called There Is So Much Here on this past Friday. So we're going to talk about that. We're going to play some of his new music. And also he is going to be playing here in Los Angeles at the Venice West out in Venice, California on Wednesday, December 7th. So we can talk about your tour too and some of your upcoming shows. Nice. So Glen is currently touring right now to support his new album. So you're on tour right now, right?
Yeah, I'm in Portland right now.
I looked up your website and you have a lot of dates coming up. So
yeah, I'm all over, going through Colorado and the Midwest, Minneapolis, and places. Okay. And then again in January. So.
Oh, okay. So if anyone wants to check out Glen's tour dates, you can check out glenphillips.com. You can look up his Instagram. It's Glen Phillips Music. And as far as the new album, I'll do some plugs at the end as far as where everyone can find it. But the new album, There Is So Much Here, you can find it on Spotify, iTunes, Apple Music, wherever you get your music. And actually what I thought was cool was that you have a purple vinyl limited edition copy on Bandcamp.
Yes, there's also an orange version. So for full-on collectors, we're incentivizing. But it's a very pretty album. Yeah.
It is. I love, if you can't tell, I love purple, I'm very girly. So yeah, I love that. Something for everyone. So what I want to do initially is just kind of talk about your history with, how you got into music and Toad the Wet Sprocket, because I looked you up this weekend. Obviously I've known you guys since the 90s, but there were a couple of things actually that I learned that I found kind of fascinating that I want to talk about. So the first thing is that you started Toad the Wet Sprocket when you were 15. Is that right?
Yeah, it was a high school band. They were all seniors. I was a freshman. We met in high school theater. And Todd, our guitarist, he had a station wagon, so I could throw my bike in the back because I was lazy. He lived 2 blocks away from me, and so he would give me a ride home. And then he had a cool record collection. We just started playing songs together. So... yeah, my first band, aside from a band called Destiny that played one gig in 8th grade at La Galena Junior High. So that didn't work very well.
I find that so amazing because do you look back on that now and you're like, my God, I was 15, I was a kid. And you just made this whole career happen for yourself at such a young age.
It's not the path that I would have expected. My family was academic. And I loved making art, but I thought I'd end up being like a high school teacher, teaching the arts, but I'm not a good hustler. So I didn't expect that. I certainly didn't expect that in my 50s, I would still be on the road making music. That's still confuses me. So.
I think that's amazing, though, because you have some people that are still trying to figure out their career at 50 years old. And it's like you just, as a teenager, just...
yeah, that's me.
You're trying to do something
I wasn't
else.
trying to figure out a career. I just liked making music. And, even now, I think as you get older, there's more of this, especially kind of post-lockdown, trying to figure out how much of your life you really want to spend away. And especially if you've invested 30-something years in going away to make a living, it's hard to try to figure out what to do to both stay home and afford the 4 walls to be in. Music makes you adaptable. I could be a truck driver, a travel agent. There are lots of things I can do, but it's an odd set of skills to kind of reapply.
Yeah, I think it's, that's kind of a give and take with anything creative. It's, you have to figure out kind of how to make a living off of doing what you love. And, I think a lot of people are unsuccessful with it, but I think that's amazing that you did it, and especially so young. And so
I'm happy to do that.
Yeah.
I think that the second part of that is kind of figuring out how to maintain relationships, which was so much easier to do in lockdown, because you get to see each other every day. And if you're always going to the next gig or the next place, just trying to find your center is a full-time job. So.
Sure.
Yeah.
So I didn't know this, but I found out that your the band name Toad the Wet Sprocket came from a Monty Python sketch, which is funny. Was it kind of like a joke that stuck?
Basically, it was a joke that stuck. We had a gig. We didn't have a name. We wanted a really cool name, but we figured we may as well have a laugh for one gig. And then it turned into a year, and we could never agree on a good name. So it just stuck by default. But yeah, it was from a sketch called Rock Notes. It's this series of just terrible band names. And Toad the Wet Sprocket's probably the worst of them. So. But
I feel like it actually kind of goes with the theme of the 90s, because the 90s, I think, was just the decade of weird music, right? Like, you had all these bands that came out like Butthole Surfers, and you know what I mean? These strange band names, and like even, you know, songs like the Crash Test Dummies, like was the name of the song. Like, it was just, I don't think these names and these songs I don't think that would fly if it was the 80s or a different decade. You know what I mean?
The weirdest band name that I feel is like it's the most, how can I say this? The most innocent name that sounds the weirdest is the Pooh Sticks.
Oh, never heard of
them. Do you
them.
remember the Pooh Sticks? No, because, but it's taken from, it sounds like the worst band name ever, but it's taken from Winnie the Pooh, and it's a game that Eeyore and Winnie the Pooh play where they drop a stick into a creek on one side of a bridge, and then they run to the other side of the bridge and they see whose stick comes out first. It doesn't work as a band name at all.
No, I mean, no, that's a terrible name.
It's a terrible name.
It is.
Much explaining. Too much explaining. And all the alternatives until you get to that point are just things you don't want to know.
Right.
So, yeah.
I know. But I think your name just fits right in. Like, you had the presidents of the USA. Like, it was just the decade of strange music that somehow the strange music just that became huge, you know, and it's so interesting. But you guys have a more pop sound, though, you know, because some of those bands sound strange too. And so I feel like if I heard your band name and then the music, it wouldn't be what I expected.
We're strange on the inside.
So your third album was kind of what put you guys on the map, Fear, that came out in 91. So it sounds like you technically split in 98, but you continued to play over the years, right? Just not consistently, and then technically got back together officially in 2010. Is that right?
Yeah, we broke for about 5 years. We had a lot of getting over it to do, is the best way to put it.
Yeah. Okay.
You know, got it. People do.
Yeah. So the other thing that I read about you guys that I also found fascinating. So you released in 2013 your first album in 16 years. So since 97. I thought it was such a cool story that you did a Kickstarter and you guys meant to raise $50,000 in 2 months, and you not only raised that in 24 hours, but you raised over $264,000. Were you mind blown by that?
Yes, it was a really cool experience, and to see. I mean, I think we weren't the cool kids, and so there was a group of people who resonated with us, and not. You know, I think we were authentic nerds who spoke to other authentic nerds and people who were, you know, sensitive at a time where there was a lot of conflation of that if you weren't loud, you didn't have any depth. And there were a lot of great things about the 90s, but there was also that like edginess at all costs, right? If everything had to be edgy, and which isn't to say that like I love Soundgarden, I loved Nirvana, I love edgy. Edgy is great, but we weren't. And so it was really, I think for us, really cool to see how much we meant to our audience still, and how much those songs stuck with people, and you know, that there was still a conversation going on. So it meant a lot to us. Yeah. Yeah.
No, I think that's incredible. I mean, you must have been just so blown away, and I think that's amazing that you had all that support after so many years, you know, of not writing an album. So clearly people were excited to hear it, you know?
Yeah.
So on that note, what was it like writing an album 16 years later when music had changed so much since the early 90s?
Um, I mean, it's not, how can I say this? Since we weren't really tied into the genre of the time, right? We always just kind of wrote songs we like. And my opinion is that good songs are portable. I mean, meaning, and it's not always the case. Like, it's really hard to do a Bjork cover, but it's possible, right?
Yeah.
It's really hard to do a Soundgarden, as another example, a Soundgarden cover. Really hard to do because there's so much that's baked in with the sounds, with the arrangement, with, with all those time signatures and solos. And with Bjork, it's like that sonic landscape is so integral. Her songs aren't normally about harmonic movement under melody, right? They move in different ways. And so our songs, I think for the most part, they could have worked, aside from the very 90s, like, I'm really depressed and my depression is really important lyrics. Like, I think those songs you could have produced in any number of ways. They're all songs that you can take on a ukulele and play by a campfire. And so writing for another album, we weren't really, I mean, there's maybe a bit of an update, but a lot of it for me was the excitement of doing another project where I knew there could be counter melody. I knew I'd have a band, right? I'd been playing solo acoustic mostly. So I was edging towards folkier and folkier stuff just because that way, if I went out with an acoustic guitar, it would sound right. And so it was just fun writing songs, knowing that I had two really great harmony singers to back me up, and a great rhythm section, and it was going to be, it was going to be this bigger sound. I mean, I think for Todd and his songs too, for the other writers as well, it was we're writing more to the band than to the genre or the time, I suppose. And kind of knowing our strengths and weaknesses. Yeah.
Yeah. So if you were going to play any Toad the Wet Sprocket song that you would want people to listen to that they may not have heard, what would you like to pick?
Enough from, which is, if there's anything that sounds like a 90s song on New Constellation, it's probably Enough. Okay. Because it's all big and ballsy and sad.
It was cool to be sad in the 90s.
It's so cool to be sad.
Okay, guys. So Glenn actually has 5 solo albums, which I didn't know, and you have 2 live albums as well. Mm-hmm. So I know a lot of artists do this, and I'm always curious as to why. So what made you, since you do have a full band, what prompts you to the decision to just make your own solo album separate from that? Like, were you going for a different sound, or what's the thought process there?
I mean, it started when the band was broken up, right? And so I had 3 kids to feed, and all I knew how to do was make music. So yeah, and I write. That's like how I stay sane. Is I write songs and sing them. So at some point, there's not much of a choice in the matter. I mean, at this point, since the band got together, I'm still kind of finding the balance, I think, between Toad albums and solo albums. Toad put out another record last year called Starting Now. And I like the opportunity to just work with different configurations. A band that's been together for 30 years, we have, there are things that are really great and really automatic, and there are things that are harder than it would be if we just met each other off the street. And we're always kind of, freshening that language, but it's a familial relationship, and it's great just to have the freshness of getting together with new people. I mean, I think the thought could be that I go and do solo albums so that I have more control, but it's often more because it's more unpredictable, and there's a danger in the studio that doesn't necessarily happen in the same way with the band, where it's new players and I don't know what direction things are going to take, and I really want to see what emerges, and the relationships are really fresh. And so it's easier to just start out of the gate with like, let's see what happens, it's a party. And that with the band, we can get there, but it takes a lot more kind of work and communication for us to all get at ease and get in our groove together. So,
Okay.
Yeah. And I write a lot of songs, so there's enough to go around usually. And, generally with Toad, it's about, half and half. Todd's music, my music, more and more.
Okay.
Dean, our bass player's adding more. So, there's songs left over, and they like to have homes. So.
Oh, got it. I was going to ask you that too, if you thought your solo music had a different sound than Toad, because it's, it sounds like in a band you're writing with other people, and then, this is just you.
Yeah, but there's also a part is like what makes a Toad song, what makes a solo song. About half the songs in Toad I write on my own. And but there's a way that we play together. Dean is this, kind of his bass lines are like super melodic, super big. Todd, as a guitarist, has an incredibly unique sound and attitude. And so I know that all those things are just going to kind of happen automatically with Toad. There's a lot that's taken off my table. And solo, I need to offer more direction, but also be more open. Like we all in Toad, we kind of know where to leave room for the other guys, and we know that it'll get filled with something great. So there's a lot of ease in that, but it's also like you also know the parameters, and you work with somebody who has a different attitude towards there's more surprise, more difference. So
got it.
Yeah.
So you had an album in 2016 called Swallowed by the New, which you had written about your divorce, correct?
Yeah.
Okay. And then, so this new album that you just released, There Is So Much Here, this, from what I understand, is about being on the other side of that. Is that right?
Yeah. Well, or even discovering that I was on the other side of that. These songs were all written for a songwriting game led by Matt the Electrician in Austin. Every week he sends out, there's like 20 of us in this list, and he sends out a prompt, like a title, and everyone writes a song with that phrase somewhere in the song. And so all of these titles, it's a different one every single week.
Oh, okay.
So in this case, all the song titles on this, it's not always the chorus of the song. Every song title on this record is a title that I got in an email from Matt the Electrician, and then I wrote the song, and 20 other musicians all wrote a song with the same prompt. So when I kind of compiled these together, I was surprised to see that I'd written all these songs about falling in love again. I'd written all these songs, the songs that weren't just about being depressed, songs that were, some of them are about facing, the current miasma of our, political, environmental situations. But a lot of them were about like learning to kind of trust and open my heart again, and the difficulty of being in a new relationship as opposed to break up. And I was like, oh, I think I turned a corner. So it was kind of cool to look at that retroactively.
Yeah. Well, and I think too, when you go through anything, any type of, emotional life event or traumatic life event, I mean, you can tell me if you agree, but I think it's healing to really channel that energy into your art, right? So I'm a writer, I've published books. And so for me, I would always write and get those feelings out. And I'm sure for you, it's writing music. Like, did you feel like that, really just kind of looking inward and exploring your emotions and putting those into music? Do you think that helped you kind of heal through that process?
I hope so. Yeah. I think of it as like letters from my future better self. There's some part of you that knows, because the how can I say, like, the good advice, it's not rocket science, right? It's, stay compassionate, stay open-hearted, be mindful, be present, don't spend too much of your energies worrying about the past or the future. Like, be right where you are at this moment, right? This is the title of the album, is There's So Much Here. But being a person means you're always forgetting that basic good advice. It's a state of constant remembering, constantly forgetting, constantly remembering, trying to have practices in line that kind of bring you back. So, for me, there's that element of, working through it, not writing from a point of view of like, hey, I got it all, got it all sussed out. Really, I'm good here. But, I'm asking questions that everybody asks. And especially with the Divorce album, it's much more of a grief album than a relationship album. The stuff that helped me get through that period, was, poets like Mary Oliver and David White, but books, more like Die Wise by Stephen Jenkinson, or The Smell of Rain on Dust by Martine Brechtel, or Pema Chodron's books, When Things Fall Apart, Comfortable with Uncertainty. It was like books on death and grief and Buddhism, and those seem to talk about more the universal part as opposed to relational grievance, or and grief is a subject that I think people are really generally in our culture very uncomfortable with, but everybody faces. We love things that change. Our kids grow up, relationships end, we grow old, we die, and some part of us, when we love things, wants them to stay the same and can't quite reckon the fact that they don't. And since it's all constant transition, all constant change, like there's a real art in grief, which is feeling that pain of the movement of these things we want to be static. So for me, that was really the meat of that record. So it didn't like top the charts or anything, but for me, it's the most important piece of work I've done because of, what it's meant to people. I saw a friend today who works with, works basically in like a locked mental ward, and uses songs off that record, with his people in this mental ward, because it's, talking about the pain they're feeling, and talking about like their grief and helping to open them up. Actually said, there's a particular song he doesn't use in there because it's a little too on the nose. He tends to go a little brighter in that ward. But that to me, especially coming from the 90s, where there's just this, I just make the music I want to make. I don't give a shit. I'm on a major label, but I don't want to have a hit. Like, there's this self-defeating kind of attitude, right? All these bands that have a radio hit and then they wouldn't play it at their concerts, or they would like disfigure it. And this way of entering the major label world, but then acting like you didn't want anyone to see what you were doing. Mm-hmm. Like you wanted to stay obscure. And it was a weird thing about the 90s. And for me, I found that these days I want my songs to be useful, if that makes sense. And as I've gone on, I see the music I listen to, I use it as a tool to help my spiritual growth. And I want to make music that, some of it's just nice to listen to, but I want to make music that cracks people open a little. And if I'm not going to get if I'm not going to get on the radio, at least I can get paid in tears. So I like seeing people ugly cry in the audience. Makes me really happy.
It all comes full circle. And it's funny you say that, because I talked about this on a previous episode of this show where, I feel like you listen to music, sure, happy songs are good too. We need those. But I tend to gravitate towards kind of more of the sadder songs, because I think as a society we need that, because people go to music a lot of times because you don't want to feel alone, and you want to feel validated in your emotions, and you want to feel like other people are feeling what you feel. And so, whenever I'm going through something, it's like I want to listen to angry music if I'm angry. I want to listen to sad music if I'm sad, and you want to just not feel alone. And what drives me crazy is I've had, there's been a few bands that I've really loved that kind of had that darker sound when they came out, or kind of sad. And I just loved, that was what they were good at. That was their sweet spot. That's what they should have stayed with. And then they'll release a second album and they like get happy all of a sudden and it doesn't work. And I don't know if maybe their labels are pushing them to do that. You know what I mean?
There's two parts to that for me. I mean, one is, because I think singing about sorrow is a way to help people feel less alone, right?
Yeah.
You know, you're not, which is a big part of what sorrow is nobody's ever felt this before, right? And so there's that. I've also found that singing joyful songs can make me joyful when I'm sad. And I discovered that later in life. I spent a lot of time in yurts kind of post-divorce, and found that, like, you know, I don't even need to believe in God, but that praying, like, through song felt amazing. And I started doing community choir leading, which is mostly like really uplifting spiritual songs. And you sing, you know, in a circle. It's beautiful music to me because there's nothing performative about it. You don't sit on the side and watch it. Everyone sings together. It's all participatory, and it's like church without a bunch of dogma, right? But I found that singing happy songs made me feel really happy, which surprised me. I mean, there's some people for whom it would not, but it's harder to write, I think, and part of it's because people are, you know, psychologically negatively predisposed, right? We remember negative emotions more strongly than positive emotions. Our default system, you know, the default network, when you're kind of at rest, wandering mind, neutral, you tend to get, if you don't have a mindfulness practice, you go into thinking about yourself, thinking about grievances, you know, like building those up. That's why I didn't sleep last night. I was doing that all night. So, and it's so having songs that speak to those, you know, to sadness, to grief, to that feeling that the world's crazy, it means a lot. But I think it's really hard to write a good positive song. Because you get into language that feels charged or cheesy or trite really easily. The best happy songs I know of tend to have a little darkness in them, tend to be very clear that things are really difficult, and that despite that, life is worth it, and that there's still joy, there's still beauty, there's no end to awe. You know, there's a lyric on the song on the new album, you know, it's won't run out of love, won't run out of wonder. I sure won't run out of tears. Though I can feel the pulse trying to drag me under, I won't give in to my fear. And, you know, and maybe it's an affirmation, and maybe affirmations are weak sauce. But on the other hand, that's saying it's not easy to keep optimism. It's not easy to look at things and reorient to gratitude. It's a really hard, difficult job. If it were easy, the world would be in much better shape, right? And that was another discovery later in life. As a person who's fought depression my entire life, I just had a big breakdown just a couple weeks ago. Like, I know that happiness is precious, and I know that happiness is hard won. You can be surfacey and avoid thinking about things that are difficult, and, you know, basically like keep all of that at arm's length. And there's a certain kind of, you know, ignorance is bliss, happiness to that, but it tends to catch up with people. And I think there's something about understanding that, like, happiness and gratitude have to be actively tended to, or, and that's actually, it's a more stringent practice than giving into cynicism. And
it is.
Yeah.
I was going to ask you if you've read the book, You Are a Badass. It was like this big bestseller, just kind of on that note, where she really talks about really practicing gratitude and, you know, having an open mind. And it's hard. Every time I've read this book a million times, because every time I read it, I'm like, yes, I need to be doing these things. I need to be meditating. I need to be, you know, writing out a gratitude list. But it's so easy to get away from that, right? Like, you'll feel great for a couple of days and then you're back into the routine.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, and it can feel cheesy. And it's, but it's not, I mean, at the end of the day, it's not cheesy. It's like, it's survival. And
Yeah.
it's not just survival. It's, you know, we have an opportunity to hopefully thrive. And not that we're at the top of the mountain all the time, but, you know, as I get older, I find, my system is way more sensitive, you know, just relationship, things like alcohol, where I'm not like never been like a heavy drinker. I don't get smashed. I don't get weird when I drink, but I get depressed as hell. If I drink like 3 days in a row, 2 beers, I'm just, you know, this organ is sensitive enough that I gotta really watch what I put into my body. I gotta watch what I put into my mind. You know, I want to be informed, and at the same time, if I'm doom scrolling, I'm gonna be up all night. And if I'm up all night too many nights in a row, I don't want to live. And when I'm not in that, and then I think about how rare life is, and how much I just want to be here, and how much I want to keep having hope, and how much I want to see the beauty. It becomes a war that I really want to fight against my darker side. So
yeah, well, I mean, alcohol it is a depressant. You know,
oh,
and
yeah.
and not to sound, you know, hippy dippy California, but it does lower your vibrations, you know, and they do say, and I've noticed it too with myself, you know.
And it doesn't take much.
I mean, I grew up in Boston and like we partied, you know, Boston's a big drinking city. And I kind of earlier this year just had to really cut it out. And I just had to cut out the hard alcohol because, you know, it's like we're all getting older here, and I would just feel terrible. And I mean, and especially when you do what you do and you perform, like, I don't know how people can get up if they're even a little hungover and go put on a performance. Like, I have a friend who's a singer out here, and she will party and then go perform, and I don't know how you guys do it.
My voice can't survive it anymore, and it's disinhibiting. That's the one thing. It's nice to go on stage and feel disinhibited, but as the years have gone by, my voice is more fragile, my happiness is more fragile, and I've found that it's more and more important for me to be really active in maintaining it, because the cost is really high if I don't. And, you know, I think for people who have like a more extreme relationship with alcohol, it's really easy to draw those lines. But I notice even within the band, if there's guys on the road, if I drink half as much as they do, I am so much more affected by it in my daily life. And it's just like, that's the way my brain's wired. And, so, you know, these are the things we learn.
Yeah, I mean, everyone's body is different and everyone's mind is different. You know, I have friends that can get up hungover and they can just go on with their day, and I'm like in bed for 2 days. You know, we're all different.
Yeah, it's wild.
And some people, some people just suffer mentally more than others too when it comes to that. So,
and there's few jobs. The last thing I will say on that is the weird thing about, you know, the experiment of being a musician is that we have one of the few jobs where you're encouraged to drink on the job, and there's pretty much a limitless supply of free alcohol. So it takes away the inhibition, the taboo of drinking at work, drinking regularly, and it takes away any economic constraints, which is, makes it easier for me when I go on the road to be a little bit binary about it.
I know. And the thing is too with music is a lot of people go to music, and not everybody, but I think some people go to music and they are in that industry because they do have some demons in here, and that's kind of where you gravitate. And so that's why you hear like people go to AA meetings out here, and it's all celebrities.
It's all entertainment.
Yeah, it is. And a lot of musicians, because I think they go wild, and then you have to get rid of those demons and just channel that through music instead of through drugs and alcohol. Because all you're really doing is postponing the inevitable, and you're avoiding having to deal with what's going on in here, So I think music is definitely healthier. So out of all the songs on your new album, which one is your favorite?
Big changes, because it's ridiculous. It's a little more of like the melody on the chorus is definitely owes a lot to XTC, and there's this big lugubrious, is that the right word? There's this big ridiculous riff in the middle part that comes out of nowhere. It's a silly song. It's a ton of fun. Yeah.
All right, big changes. And I want to ask Glenn his opinion on just how music has changed, I think, since the 90s. And not so much the style of music, but just the entire distribution process, right? Because, I mean, you've been here through all of this. And back in the 90s, you know, people had CDs and cassette tapes, and you needed a label to really put that out. And now, as you've learned in your experience, you can make a Kickstarter and you can put out your own music if you want. So I think that's really interesting. And I would love to get your take on, you know, if you think artists today, if they still need labels, you know, if you've thought about kind of the self-releasing route, and what are your thoughts on that?
No, I've done a lot of self-releases. I'm back on a label right now because it still takes a team to get it out. It takes people who aren't starting from a stop, if that makes sense. You know, meaning that if you're submitting to the DSPs and you want to get on playlists, you need to know which playlists are relevant, who to go out to, and who the tastemakers are, and you need to, you know, doing your own publicity, you got to at least hire a publicist. It helps if there's coordination between that and other marketing things. They're still selling LPs. There are a lot of jobs to do. And I've done a lot of records where I just stuck it up on Bandcamp and then went, and nobody ever knew it existed. You know, side projects. I got a weird side project called Remote Tree Children that no one's ever heard, but it's fun and nerdy and weird. And so I've done it in all ways. I mean, I think part of, you know, that 90s attitude of like, I'm on a major label, but I'm not a sellout, right? That attitude was also partly paid for because this was an era where labels had an incredible amount of money. They were still selling LPs. They were also still selling cassettes. They were also, selling CDs. So people were buying on as many as 3 formats, and you couldn't download. So they were getting money, right, for each one of those. If you liked a record, like records I bought, I often had at least 2 copies, right? Because I wanted the real cassette. I could dub it, but it never sounded as good. And so you'd own multiple copies of the same album. So record companies had a lot of money to put into artist development. They could afford to be patient while a band came out. They could afford to hire bands that felt like outliers and kind of trust their taste and let things happen. So there was a lot of creative freedom in that era, and both creative freedom and a lot of label support. You know, when we went to a town, we'd go to 2 radio stations, we would do press, we would go to a record store and do an in-store. I mean, Columbia Records worked us ragged. We did so much promo. And it was a really great team. So, I mean, music doesn't happen in the same ways. And I think bands in that time, they could afford to be catty about success and take it for granted because they had so much support that I don't think there was this realization of what the actual agreement was. And I think kids now, I mean, the sad thing about now to me is I don't know if you could have things like Neutral Milk Hotel or Elliott Smith or, Dirty Projectors or Nick Drake, like things that are really fringy from people who aren't at all concerned with self-promotion. They wouldn't have been able to get a record deal because they wouldn't have had 100,000 followers on TikTok or whatever, right?
Right.
And you have to be good at social media now. Like the first thing an A&R person looks at, they don't go and see a show. They look at you on social media.
Yeah.
And if you don't already have it going there, you don't matter.
Well, I noticed your Instagram says that you're reluctant with social media.
Yeah, I hate social media. I hate it. And I made my living off social media during lockdown as well. I mean, it's a tool we have to use, but it means that unless you have a team that's really behind you, if you are a sensitive artist who really is just wanting to say what's on your heart, you don't really give a shit about selling it. I mean, that's the thing for me is in the last few years, like starting to do the choir leading stuff, I think music, I was doing an interview recently and somebody was, is the streaming stuff and social media, is that destroying music? It's like, I'm like, I think like recording ruined music. And I say this as someone who loves being in the studio, and I just put out an album. But until 120 years ago, if you wanted to hear a song, you had to either sit in front of somebody playing it or you had to play it yourself. You wanted to hear a hit song, you would go to a concert, publishers would have somebody playing the hits of the day. You'd buy the sheet music and take it home, and you'd sing with your family every day. And that was already in Western society, which was removed from having a deep, you go to any intact society and you all know your songs, right? There's songs that every culture has always had that they sing together, and to turn it entirely into something that's, audience and performer, to commodify it, to me feels like it's one of the biggest medicines in the human experience. And like every medicine, we've taken it and we've commodified it and we've turned it into a drug. And once again, I say this as a touring, performing musician, but I have been so reinvigorated by making music in non-commercial places and making music that is not in a performance modality. And it's so beautiful and invigorating. And there's a lot of beauty and brilliance in a performance. There's a lot that happens when you're in front of an audience at a club. I love it. It's my living. But when we get like, it's not like the 90s, you got to do this and that, or, we're still just talking about an industry that takes something sacred and turns it into fashion. And I'm trying not to swear again. Like, so for me, like, like the part of me that has that punk rock ethos is still, I think people should be singing songs to each other every day. I think people should be living inside of music more, because it is the easiest, cheapest. If you want a medicine that brings people together, regulates your breath, regulates your heartbeat, helps you to get over disagreements, helps you to see people who are different than you in a compassionate way. There's no quicker and better tool than music. There's no better tool than singing together. And that happens in concerts. It does happen when people, it's not like it doesn't happen, but the fact that you don't go home to your family and sing together, like you listen to recorded music or you do whatever. And it used to be, I have a feeling, I don't know. I just think singing together is an incredibly important thing. And so I worry a little less about, I don't know, is there radio? It's like radio is just another technology. The technologies come and go, and they all select for certain kinds of music. They all select for certain kinds of personalities or promotional profiles. But they're all just technologies, and some people use them better than others. So I don't know. Yeah.
So before we wrap the show, I'm going to do some social media plugs.
Absolutely.
And then we're going to end with one more song, and I'm going to have you pick. So you can find Glen and his tour dates at glenphillips.com. You can find him on Instagram, even though he hates social media. His tour dates are there, I looked. So you can go to Glen Phillips Music.
I've even been trying to do reels. It's so painful.
Oh, no. I'm not into the reels either. My friends send them to me, and I had to send out a group message, and I said, guys, stop sending me reels. I'll never watch them. Like, it just got overwhelming. And so again, Glen is playing at the Venice West on Wednesday, December 7th. So definitely check him out. I'm so mad because I'm going to be out of town because I wanted to go to that show. And I'm like, I'm never going to get to this venue. I live, like 10 minutes away. But definitely go check him out there. I've heard it's a cool venue. And Venice doesn't have any... yeah, that's true. I know, because Venice doesn't have any other real... Even the West Side, like we really don't have any venues out this way. So that's it's cool. I'm glad we have that spot. And you're playing there. Is there anything else you want to say to our listeners?
Like, follow. No, smash that like. Check out the new record, and I'll see you on the road.
If there was one song from the 90s that was a big, musical influence for you or anything in that aspect, what would you pick?
I mean, if we want to go the album that felt like, for me, I'm just trying to think what songs on it obscure. How about exit music from a film? Just because OK Computer was... That album for me felt like how it must have felt when Sgt. Pepper's came out. Like, you knew that there was going to be a before and an after. And
I love that.
I was a big Talk Talk fan, but like since those late Talk Talk records, I hadn't heard anything that just was like, whoa, like they changed the vocabulary and things would never be the same. And
I know. He's talking about Radiohead for anyone who doesn't know.
That's a fun
all right. Radiohead, Exit Music for Film. I mean, it's one of the best songs of all time, I think. Yeah. I just had this conversation actually this weekend because I love the Bends too. The Bends was what I grew up like in high school. It's kind of nostalgic for me, but I think that front to back is a fantastic album too. And I'm kind of tied between the Bends and OK Computer because the Bends was just rock, right? And then OK Computer was when they started to go a little electronic, but it's still brilliant. I'm not a big Kid A person. I think they went a little too electronic in some of them, but I don't know. Do you like the Bends as well?
I like the Bends as well, and I like Kid A. I feel like in their later stuff, I love that you can always tell they're pushing themselves to try something difficult. Yeah. And sometimes the experiment is better than others, but as a band at every level of their composition, I feel they're always pushing themselves into uncomfortable territory, and that it's a similar thing with Bjork. I admire everything they do. I don't love everything they do. Sure. But I admire that they've never stopped. Like, they're bands I love who just, at some point, sometimes it feels like they're boring themselves a little. And I've never had that sense with them that they were sitting still. I've always had the sense that they were like really on their edge. So yeah,
I think that's a great choice. I'm happy you picked that. All right, guys. Well, thank you so much, Glen, for coming on. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
So everyone go check out Glen's new record. Go see him on the road. Thanks, Glen.
All right. Thank you. Take care.